The Kingdom of the Blind, Squad Halcyon, a Warhammer 40,000 novel, by Maskmaster. A heartfelt thanks to the people who made this telling of this story possible. Corbin, Amelia, Beatrice, Xander, Alessandro, Freya, Logan, Jen, Kaz, Jacob, an internet user known only as DigiReaper67, and 4 random Darktide players. This archive is the collected memoirs and journals of 3 of Inquisitor Kane's most accomplished operatives. Historitor Investigatus Dr. Gallius Julius Servius Bellicus VI, henceforth referred to as Dr. Bellicus for brevity, Solara von Medelius, the Emperor's cleansing flame made manifest, and Guardsman 555-5, otherwise known as Fives. These acolytes participated in Operation Halcyon, a classified destabilization campaign in the world of Caneus, and were instrumental to the success of the operation and the eventual downfall of the rebellious Caneus Federation. I compiled their records not only for the purpose of historical documentation, in keeping with Inquisitor Kane's guiding philosophy, but so future acolytes may learn from their mistakes and their doubts. Some within the Ordo Hereticus may balk at this notion, believing doubt to be the first sign of an acolyte betraying the Inquisition. I ask them what their acolytes will do when faced with a problem more complex than a mad sorcerer proclaiming the truth of chaos from the rooftops. Those who serve the God Emperor without reservation are only useful as blunt instruments for battering down cult strongholds. The best acolytes, and those who will eventually ascend to become interrogators and inquisitors, are always self-reflective. At the risk of sounding like one of my longtime sister-in-arms' badly timed jokes, they must also be inquisitive, as these 3 were. The archive begins sometime in M4214, concurrent with the beginning of Operation Halcyon, and 10 standard years after the death of planetary governor Emilian Marchant. The Astra Militarum was deployed to the planet in M4208, and the war had effectively ground to a halt by the time the Inquisition involved itself. I will begin the narrative with the writings of Dr. Bellicus as, regrettably, neither Fives nor Solara take the time to describe their surroundings, the other agents, or the mission objective in great detail. Fives has confided in me that the writing of his memoirs years after the operation was a reflective experience for him. Thus, I don't begrudge him for not explaining his assumptions about the workings of the galaxy, especially in a document nobody requested he author. Solara, meanwhile, didn't give a frack about what anyone else needed to hear, in her own words. The journal entries and combat reports of other operatives will be included when they provide an otherwise unattainable perspective on important aspects of the operation. Interrogator Kyrus Rill, Ordo Hereticus, M42-19. Chapter 1. Piety is only complicated for the small portion of the population that chooses to think about what it means. Gaius Aporia Mellitus, Collected Essays. It was not by choice that I assembled this account, nor by luck, good or bad, but by the skeins of fate, by a single stroke of a brush wielded by the Emperor himself. Or perhaps the whims of some malevolent cosmic entity who delighted in inconveniencing me. Indeed, I had no intention of becoming part of any inquisitorial operation, nor any foreknowledge of the ever-watchful Eye's machinations. When I first encountered the woman who would become my new commanding officer, it came as a shock, complete with a way-station side panel collapsing before my very eyes. There are certain assumptions one must make when scrivening, especially with intent to publish. One such favourite assumption of mine is that whomever the grand and glorious Imperial Regent has entrusted to print and distribute my mad ramblings, they have neglected to include any biographical information regarding me, as well as a picked capture of my face. Some do so out of pure lack of dedication to the historiator's process, some merely lack the budget. Regardless, understanding your author remains paramount in properly dissecting any self-professed historical document, for nobody is free of bias or intellectual blind spots, least of all an individual born and raised in the Imperium of Man. To this end, I shall describe myself, my history, and my full name and titles, which rarely fit neatly on a book's cover. I am Historitor Investigatus Gallius Julius Servius Bellicus VI, esteemed holder of a Licentia Dicendi Divinitatis with a specialization in hagiography, which I have never fully used. I stand at 1.87 meters tall, with a rather dark complexion, shoulders of a slightly above-average breadth, and a tremendously well-kept full beard. Local records indicate I was born in M41-963, though between the unfortunate realities of interstellar communication, the peculiarities of warp travel, and that pesky theory of relativity, the exact moment at which I entered this terribly disorganized galaxy could be anywhere from a year to a decade before or after what is written upon my birth certificate, depending on who you ask. Though, if my graying hair is any indication, the original date is a sufficient approximation. I hail from the town of Alanius, nestled between two exceptionally calm lakes on the northern continent of the planet Bilus Mundi. That is the town of Alanius located at 53 degrees north, 104.5 degrees west. As my prior attempts to collect my mail have indicated, whatever bureaucrat had the unfortunate task of naming municipalities on this world was rather lacking in creativity, as there are 62 towns on the northern continent with that exact name. Bilus Mundi is colloquially known as the world without a past, as none of its recorded history extends past approximately 467 years ago. It is known that the planet was settled before that point, reflected in administratum tithe records, but no local documentation exists prior to that. While I would like to say it is my life's work to discover what befell our world to see its entire history stricken from memory, I am not in the business of lying. Truthfully, I have not had the time to investigate the matter since joining the Logos Historica Veritas. On that note, I was among the second wave of esteemed scholars chosen to join this most prestigious organization founded by the avenging son Rabute Gilliman. Any information on the selection process beyond that is highly classified, even to the ranks of the Inquisition, and thus I am forbidden from specifying further. Rest assured that the Lord Regent had only the Imperium's best interests in mind when he founded an organization dedicated to creating an unbiased history of his father's glorious creation. Of course, accomplishing such a thing is more difficult than it sounds, and it already sounds quite difficult, but I and many others have risen to the occasion. Were there a picked capture included alongside this lengthy description, I would prefer to show one of the finest moments in my career as a historiator, the discovery of St. Lindvina's tomb. This feat is unlikely to garner any admiration from even the most scholarly of the imperial public, as most people have never heard of St. Lindvina, but I quite enjoyed the ensemble I wore on that expedition, and it has become something of a signature look. Simple, rugged pants with an off-yellow hue, a wide-brimmed hat which has survived a considerable beating over its long years, a plain undershirt, and a grox leather jacket with as many pockets as my tailor told me I could reasonably have. Alas, I have stalled long enough. My involvement in Operation Halcyon began on Waystation 58, popularly known as the Pilgrim's Last Chance. It advertises itself as the final stop between the Segmentum Pacificus and the Segmentum Solar, though I discovered 5 separate orbital platforms that claim the same title during some cursory research about the neighboring sectors. I was there on a layover, awaiting transportation back to Olo's Gate, then to Terra. My assorted coffers, satchels, and cases were filled to the brim with documents collected from the buried archives of Grizdis, the capital hive of Kodavok III. One of Kodavok's governors attempted to establish his late father as a sector-wide saint, and was nearly successful. The ecclesiarchy, unsurprisingly, attempted with equal vigor and considerably more scorn to destroy all records of the incident. My analysis of the available documents, entitled The False Saint of Tourism, will likely already be available in LHV archives by the time I complete this account. Its availability to the imperial public will depend on the opinions and work ethic of 34 censorship and pious conduct ministries and 2 oversight committees. I and my effects were sat alone in Terminal Iota, nourished by naught but a meat pie and the 3rd worst cup of recaf I've experienced in my life. Abruptly, one of the wall panels folded inward, revealing a barren hallway and 2 soldiers in black carapace armor. Their uniforms bore conspicuously few markings. Pardon, am I being questioned? I found it best to preempt any conversations with such inquiries, in the event that these mysterious men belonged to an organization concerned with legitimacy. We have no questions for you, Doctor. Come with us. No questions. That's a first in my profession. I gathered my findings and hurried after them. I have also found it best to comply with commands issued by large individuals with guns, lest you become a matter of historical record yourself. They led me down a twisting passage, which I suspected was snaking behind each of the major terminals in that wing of the station. It terminated in some kind of listening post, positively filled with cogitators and monitors showing entirely unremarkable parts of the station. Hallways, the exterior of bathrooms, and forgotten corners of loading bays were covertly spied upon, complete with hidden microphones transmitting the ambient noise of the Pilgrim's Last Chance. The lighting in that glorified broom closet was so harsh I suspected I was about to be beaten senseless for information again. Standing in the center of the room, accompanied by 2 more soldiers and a scrivening servitor, was a member of the Adeptus Sororitas. Her black power armor had been polished to the point I could see a blurred outline of myself on its surface. A fur collar and a decorative halo drew attention to her face, which was covered in faded scars. She bore a wrinkled expression of intense discipline, reminiscent of my least favorite professors in university. Her age, too, was reminiscent of my least favorite professors, who had just enough years to be seasoned professionals, perhaps even to have children leaving the proverbial nest, but lacked the wisdom to move past standard imperial zealotry. Her hair, of course, was bleached white and chin-length. "Excuse me, am I correct in assuming you are a sister of battle? For what holy purpose have I been summoned?" "Your courage is admirable," she responded flatly. "Generally, if someone is going to ignore a question so flagrantly, I prefer they do it with some charisma. Don't want to be remembered as a coward, do I? T3, a chair." The servitor began to whir, and brought me a place to sit with a sickly gait. "Have a seat." I complied immediately. Despite appearances, the provided chair was markedly more comfortable than the terminal seats. "All right, then. I also assume you're—" I quickly caught myself falling into an old habit. Making any sort of demand in a situation such as this can result in a swift separation of the head and spinal column. There were a great many potential queries on what in the Emperor's name I had been so rudely interrupted for, but there was no need to let her know about any of them. "Wait, no questions. I presume you're here to deliver either a message or an order." The overbearing individual produced a data slate, and began reading from it in stark defiance of conversational etiquette. Historiator Investigatus Dr. Gallius Julius Servius Bellicus VI. Discovered the origin of King Herod's feast on Danelia, headed archaeological expeditions on Keter V under the guise of an Emperor's Scouts troop leader, chronicled the final decades of Confessor Oral Gorzica before he was killed in action fighting alongside the Catachan jungle fighters. Is this correct? She had certainly done her research. "Bravery speaks for itself, and it demands answers. I am Palatine Justinia Comemnos of the Order of Our Martyred Lady, here on behalf of Inquisitor Walter Anselm Kane of the Ordo Hereticus." She handed the data slate off to one of the soldiers and placed both hands behind her back. Though perhaps it would be more accurate to say she shoved it into his chest plate. He nearly dropped his lasgun. Inquisitor Kane specifically requested one of the Imperial Regent's own Logos Historica Veritas be offered a position in an upcoming operation on the world of Caneus. Our most recent records indicate that you were the closest historiator to the planet. Do not treat this as a threat. It is a request from one of the Emperor's faithful servants to another. You are free to refuse, as neither I nor Inquisitor Kane would dare disrupt the work of the Avenging Sun. And what a barrage of information it was! I took a moment to reel at the fact that the ever-watchful eye was presently confronting me man to man. Then a smile crept across my face. What a tremendous opportunity to earn the backing of the Inquisition, I thought. This Walter Kane sounds like a great intellectual. I would be honored to accompany such a worthy endeavor, of course providing there's something to uncover. Again I reconsidered my words. I ought not insinuate that she could be wrong about anything. That tends to offend the sensibilities of those closely associated with the ecclesiarchy. Of course, I don't mean to imply that I doubt his judgment, but if this planet's history is so lost as to require the attention of a historiator, well, I am honored. I accept your proposal. She seemed undeterred, and I silently thanked the Emperor that he sent me a servant with more brain cells on her person than bullets. There is much to unearth, Dr. Bellicus. Our fragmented records indicate a distress call sent out in the 39th millennium, describing some kind of mechanical monstrosity larger than even the mightiest of the Titan Legion's god engines. That machine destroyed any semblance of imperial record-keeping, and the provisional planetary government that took control in the aftermath was one of, she grit her teeth ever so slightly, insufficient faith. It allowed heresy to fester across the planet's surface. Now they have declared open rebellion. By this point I could hardly contain my excitement, get me killed though it may. This, an entire planet's history, recovered by my own, you— I paused to nonchalantly clear my throat. I apologize. That was unprofessional. This is somewhat of a dream come true for me, recovering the past of a planet fallen to heresy, finding the faith in their history. Once more I had to stop myself. I'm monologuing. I assume there's no issue with me returning my findings to Terra and Macragge when the opportunity arises? So long as the proper inquisitorial operations are scrubbed from public record, there will be no issue. Of course. I assume you've made arrangements for us to travel to the system directly from here. And what of my previous findings? The scroll cases rattled against each other as I held them up for her evaluation. She looked to our left, and another wall panel folded in on itself, revealing a fully hidden docking bay with a Gloriana-class battleship visible beyond its atmospheric shielding. We can send them back to Terra. The Arcturus system beckons. First impressions were a tremendously important thing when dealing with a potentially murderous warrior woman, and thus mine had to be positive. "It has been a pleasure meeting you, Palatine. I hope our future endeavors are prosperous," I said as I held out my hand. She was noticeably not expecting a handshake, but returned it nonetheless. The soldiers gathered up my research, and though I was somewhat skeptical about their ability to handle priceless historical documentation at the time, they proved effective couriers. As I write this, the very trunks and boxes I handed off to them are in the room behind me, with only 2 pages missing from their innumerable contents. One of said pages was an incidental report on the state of the Capital Hive's plumbing, so I have chalked its absence up to carelessness. Once aboard the Holy Wisdom, as I learned the battleship was titled, I was given the finest available accommodations short of an officer's cabin. The stateroom smelled of morning dew and crisp fruit of an indeterminate species, though the decor left something to be desired, consisting primarily of the visages of saints or the Emperor himself, with no regard for petty mortal concerns like creativity or expression. Paintings, wooden chairs, even the bed-sheets were laden with imperious symbolism. While I was examining the gaudy Emperor-saturated decorum, I realized I had misplaced my 13th favorite pen somewhere in the station. Oh well. I have become acclimated to the myriad discomforts of warp travel through my many years gallivanting around forgotten corners of the Emperor's domain, so when the starboard view was eclipsed by those ever-familiar metal shutters, I merely set my tea down and steeled myself. It is never a good idea to be ingesting anything when one's current residence pierces the veil. The transit itself was an uneventful, night-terror-laden month and a half, though only the Emperor knew how much time passed in real space. When the mighty vessel graced the materia with its presence once more, I was amidst a pleasant dream of the roving fields of Bilus Mundi. Of course it had entered my mind as a cabal of frenzied cultists attempting to disembowel me, but a talent for reshaping dreams is an essential tool for a historiator, and I never venture anywhere unequipped. I was awoken by a screeching laud-hailer which the ship's architects had so inconsiderately placed inside the cabin. "The following personnel must report to the bridge at once. Master-at-Arms Margot Knox, Sister Petra, Nihilator Enoch, Solara, Salvo Dechario, Dr. Gallius Bellicus." I was pleased by their withholding of my full title. The Logos was sure to have an unduly negative reputation among the ranks of the Inquisition, and I would strongly prefer not to commit suicide by 2 las-bolts to the back of the head. The names and ranks of my soon-to-be squad-mates sunk their proverbial hooks into my thoughts, and I pondered what hidden meaning was contained therein. One was likely a battle-sister, another an assassin. 3 lacked surnames. Only 2 held a formal rank. It became difficult to hold on to the scattered fragments of information as I drifted in and out of wakefulness. Mornings, or whatever passed for them on board a void ship, are often a terrible time to ruminate. I clawed myself away from the cabin bed, which seemed at the time to be a most inviting prospect compared to whatever droll mission briefing awaited me, set some tea to boil, and collected myself. Another stormtrooper was waiting for me at the door. Whether to guide me to the bridge on an unfamiliar ship or execute me for lacking punctuality, I can only surmise.